Imagine waking up tomorrow and realizing you have absolutely nothing. Your bank account is empty, your partner has left, you have no home, and you are standing on the street holding the hand of your toddler.
Wow.
You look down into their eyes, knowing you are their entire world. How far would you go? What humiliations would you endure? And how hard would you fight to promise them a future? Could you rebuild your life from zero?
I mean, that is a terrifying scenario to even put yourself in for a second.
Right. But in 1982, a man named Christopher Paul Gardner actually had to answer that exact question.
He really did.
And he had to answer it while, sitting on the floor of a locked public restroom at a transit station.
Yeah, just listening to the footsteps of security guards right outside the door.
Exactly. Terrified that they were going to kick him and his sleeping infant son out into the cold.
It's just unthinkable.
So welcome to the deep dive. We are looking at the actual mechanics of survival today. This isn't just some fluffy story about pulling yourself up by your bootstraps.
No, not at all.
It is a forensic examination of a man who engineered a literal blueprint to escape the darkest corners of poverty.
And then, he used that exact same blueprint to completely conquer Wall Street.
Exactly. So our mission today is to look at Christopher Gardner, born on February 9, 1954 in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, and really decode the strategic framework he built to survive.
Yeah, and to understand the architecture of his success, you really first have to understand the crumbling foundation he was forced to build upon.
Right, because Milwaukee in the 1950s, it was a city of stark contrasts.
It was. On paper, sure, it was experiencing this post-war industrial boom, but for a black family in a working-class neighborhood, the economic reality was bleak.
Struggle was just the baseline.
Yeah, exactly. And for Chris, the instability wasn't just economic, it was deeply domestic.
Huh.
His biological father, Thomas Turner, was living all the way down in Louisiana.
He was essentially a phantom.
A total phantom. Chris
Yeah.
wouldn't even meet him until he was 28 years old. So from day one, there is this profound vacuum where a stabilizing force should have been.
And nature abhors a vacuum. Right.
Always.
And in Chris's case, it was filled by a man named Freddie Triplett, who was his new stepfather.
Yeah, and if we look at the psychological profile of the household once Triplett arrives, it is essentially a hostage situation.
That's a good way to put it. It wasn't just like a strict household.
No, it was an environment defined by completely capricious, unpredictable terror.
Unpredictable terror. That is the precise term for it.
Because when a child's primary environment is structurally unsafe like that, the developing brain undergoes these severe adaptations.
Right, the hypervigilance kicks in.
Exactly. Triplett subjected Chris, his mother Betty Jean, and his sisters to just extreme physical and psychological abuse.
Yeah.
They lived in a constant state of hypervigilance.
You learn to read the microscopic shifts in a room.
Right.
Like the way a door closes.
The tone of a voice.
Yeah, because failing to anticipate that next explosion of rage could mean severe physical harm.
It was life or death. And the facts of this abuse are staggering. I mean, consider being 15 years old. It's Christmas Day.
Oh man, this story.
You are washing up in the bathtub, and without warning, your stepfather kicks the bathroom door open, holding a shotgun.
Holding a shotgun on a kid in the bathtub.
Right. He forces you out of the house, completely naked, at gunpoint, straight into the freezing Wisconsin winter.
That isn't just a bad memory.
No, that is acute trauma. That permanently alters your central nervous system.
And Triplett's abuse wasn't just physical violence either. He was a master of psychological warfare.
Oh, absolutely. He understood exactly how to weaponize the state against his own family to maintain absolute control over them.
Right, because there's that one specific instance where he falsely reported Chris's mother, Betty Jean, for welfare fraud,
He called the authorities on his own wife.
knowing full well the system would blindly punish her.
Precisely. It was a calculated move just to demonstrate his absolute power. And the system complied, Betty Jean was incarcerated based on this false report.
Which means Chris and his sisters were immediately seized and thrust into the foster care system.
The family structure was entirely dismantled by the exact person entrusted to protect it.
And the cycle of instability just accelerates from there. Because fast forward a few years, Chris is 8 years old, and suddenly he and his sisters are thrown right back into foster care.
Yeah, the second stint.
And the reason behind this second stint is a really grim testament to how desperate the situation had become.
It really is.
Betty Jean had been convicted of trying to murder Triplett.
Right. She intentionally tried to burn the house down while he was inside.
Which is extreme, obviously. But when you analyze the mechanics of domestic abuse, you often see victims pushed into a corner where violence feels like the literal only viable exit strategy.
Betty Jean was trapped. The authorities had already proven they could be completely manipulated by her abuser.
The law offered her zero protection.
None. So she resorted to a desperate, extreme measure to physically eliminate the threat to her children, but the result, of course, was her own imprisonment.
And her children being cast right back into the cold, bureaucratic machinery of the state foster system.
Yeah. But inside that bleak machinery, Chris actually finds a brief anchor.
Uncle Henry.
Yes. He gets to know his maternal uncles, and Uncle Henry actively steps into that void. He gives Chris a completely different template for how a man can operate in the world.
Developmentally, the timing of Uncle Henry's presence was so critical for him.
It was. Chris was at an age where he was actively seeking a behavioral model. And Henry demonstrated that masculinity didn't have to equate to violence or volatility or terror.
He offered stability and kindness.
Exactly. But the tragedy here is just a matter of terrible timing. When Chris was only 9, Uncle Henry accidentally drowned in the Mississippi River.
Oh, man. The funeral scene in the source material is just one of the most sobering details.
It breaks your heart.
Chris and his sisters are standing by the casket,
Yeah.
mourning the only decent man they know.
Yeah.
And they don't even know where their mother is, until the doors open and Betty Jean walks into the funeral home.
Escorted by a prison guard.
Wearing handcuffs.
Right. From a cognitive standpoint, just imagine being a 9-year-old processing that visual.
You can't.
Your single source of safety is dead in a box, and your single source of unconditional love is literally chained to the state. The message the world is sending this child is basically, you are completely, utterly alone.
Which brings us to the operational philosophy that actually emerges from all this darkness. Because Betty Jean, despite being incarcerated, hardwires 2 core concepts into Chris's mind.
She does. And the first is a pretty brutal reality check. She tells him straight up, the cavalry ain't coming.
The cavalry ain't coming. That is a profound lesson in radical accountability.
Yeah, Betty Jean was systematically dismantling the myth of a savior. She was telling her son, look at our lives, Chris. The government isn't going to save us.
A benevolent stranger isn't going to knock on the door and rescue us.
Right. If you are waiting for help, you will die waiting. Your survival is entirely on your shoulders.
It is a heavy burden for a kid.
It is, but it eliminates the paralysis of victimhood.
And the second concept she gives him, which he later formalizes into a whole philosophy, is spiritual genetics.
Yes. Spiritual genetics.
Now, I have to be honest here. I struggle with this term a little bit.
Really? How come?
It borders on toxic positivity for me.
Uh-huh.
It's like being handed a blueprint for a collapsed building and being told to just go build a skyscraper.
I can see that.
If you are a kid trapped in systemic generational poverty, surrounded by violence, being told to just recode your spirit feels a bit dismissive of actual physical barriers. It sounds like a motivational, poster masking structural inequality.
Okay, that is a highly valid critique if you misinterpret the concept as mere positive thinking.
Right.
But Gardner's application of spiritual genetics is not about ignoring physical reality at all. It is a very specific framework for psychological self-preservation.
How so?
Well, think about biological genetics. They're fixed, right? You inherit your height, your predisposition to certain diseases, your eye color. You can't change those. Gardner argues that your spiritual DNA, your ethics, your resilience, your behavioral responses are not fixed. They are modular.
So it's not about ignoring the trauma,
Yeah.
but rather actively refusing to replicate it.
Exactly. It is cognitive behavioral therapy performed by a child in real time. Chris looked at his environment, the alcoholism, the domestic violence, the illiteracy, the pervasive sense of powerlessness.
And he didn't just say, I will transcend this with good vibes.
No, he looked at those specific traits and consciously chose to splice them out of his own behavioral code.
Like editing a gene?
Yes. He made a deliberate, engineered decision. I will not be an abuser. I will not drink. I will not abandon my children. He treated his character like an open source program that he actually had the admin rights to rewrite.
That is a brilliant mechanism. And I want to turn to you listening to this right now. Think about your own spiritual genetics for a second.
Yeah, that's a great exercise.
We all inherit mindsets, financial habits, or emotional reactions from our families. What is a specific generational cycle in your family tree that you are actively, consciously choosing to break? What faulty wiring are you ripping out of your own blueprint?
It's powerful to think about. because that active rewiring is what allowed Gardner to physically leave Milwaukee in the first place.
Right. He didn't just drift away. He executed a plan.
Straight out of high school, inspired by the memory of Uncle Henry, he joined the United States Navy.
And he serves his time as a hospital corpsman, gets out, and by 1974, he makes his way to San Francisco.
And he actually builds a very respectable life there.
He does. He secures a position as a clinical research assistant at the University of California Medical Center. He's working under a prominent cardiac surgeon named Dr. Robert Ellis.
He's managing a lab. He's co-authoring medical papers in recognized journals. I mean, he is on a solid trajectory toward becoming a physician.
He had definitely proven his intellectual capacity. But here is where the mechanical reality of economics just collides with his ambition.
Yeah, the math catches up.
By the early 1980s, Gardner is earning roughly $8,000 a year in this research position.
Which, if we adjust that for inflation, it's equivalent to about $28,500 today.
And trying to live on $28,000 a year in San Francisco, even in the 1980s, is just mathematical suicide.
It's impossible.
The pressure cooker finally explodes in January 1981 when his son, Christopher Gardner Jr., is born.
Right.
Chris is living with his girlfriend, Jackie Medina. He looks at his infant son. He looks at his W-2. He looks at the required decade of expensive medical school, the residency, the massive debt required to actually become a doctor.
And he realizes the math simply does not support his primary objective.
Which was what?
His primary objective, the absolute core of his spiritual genetics, was that his child would never experience the poverty he did.
Right.
So Gardner makes a highly calculated, pragmatic pivot. He abandons his dream of medicine entirely and takes a job in medical sales.
Specifically, he becomes a salesman for portable bone density scanners.
Yeah. It effectively doubles his income on paper, but the logistics of the job are an absolute nightmare.
Let's look at the mechanics of selling these scanners. Because this wasn't selling software over the phone in an air-conditioned office.
Not at all.
These scanners were incredibly niche, highly expensive pieces of medical equipment. They were viewed by most doctors as an unnecessary luxury rather than a clinical necessity.
Furthermore, they were physically burdensome. I mean, Gardner had to lug these heavy machines weighing nearly 40 pounds by hand from hospital to hospital, clinic to clinic, across the steep hills of San Francisco.
While working entirely on commission.
Exactly. The market saturation was low, the rejection rate was astronomical, and the physical toll was just exhausting.
It was a grind that was slowly destroying his relationship with Jackie, too, due to the relentless financial anxiety.
Yeah, the stress was suffocating. And this grind sets the stage for the catalyst.
Ah, yes, the red Ferrari moment.
It sounds like fiction, I know, but it is a documented historical event.
Paint the scene for us.
Okay, so Chris is in the parking lot of San Francisco General Hospital. He is physically carrying this heavy medical scanner, and he sees a man impeccably dressed, pulling into a parking space in a pristine red Ferrari.
Now, analyze the standard human reaction to this scenario for a second.
Right. Most people, exhausted, broke, and stressed, would look at that Ferrari with pure resentment.
Oh, absolutely. They might assume the driver inherited the wealth, or they might just feel a sharp pang of envy and keep walking.
But Gardner engages in a masterclass of micro-opportunity exploitation.
He walks right into the car.
Right up to it.
And he offers the man his parking spot in exchange for the answers to just 2 questions.
What do you do and how do you do it?
The sheer audacity of that interaction cannot be overstated. I mean, he has no college degree, no MBA, no connections.
I didn't ask for money. He didn't ask for a job. He asked for the underlying mechanics of the man's success.
And the man in the Ferrari was a stockbroker named Bob Bridges.
Yes. And Bridges actually answered the questions. He explained the world of high finance, the commission structures, and the earning potential. In that 10-minute conversation, Gardner's entire paradigm shifted.
But let's analyze the reality of this pivot. Because breaking into the 1980s Wall Street Boys Club as a black man with no formal financial background, I mean, jumping into Wall Street finance in the 1980s is like trying to climb Mount Everest in flip-flops.
It really is. It was like trying to log into a highly secure mainframe where everyone else was born with the password and you don't even have a keyboard.
The financial world at that time was fiercely insular. They hired from Ivy League schools, not from the parking lot of a public hospital.
Statistically, his chances were 0. But Bob Bridges was a rare individual who recognized raw hunger.
He didn't just drive away.
No, Bridges actually scheduled a follow-up meeting with Gardner. He explained the licensing process and, most importantly, he provided access. Bridges set up meetings for Gardner with branch managers at major brokerage firms that offered training programs. Firms like Merrill Lynch, Payne Weber, E.F. Hutton, and Dean Witter Reynolds.
Access is everything.
Mm.
And Gardner treats these meetings like life or death operations.
He had to.
For 2 months, he scales back his medical fails. He is driving all over the financial district to attend these interviews.
Yeah.
But he has no money for parking garages, so he parks his car illegally on the street.
Right, he is racking up a mountain of parking tickets just to ensure he doesn't miss these narrow windows of opportunity.
He is operating on a strategy of absolute risk, trading his immediate, meager livelihood for a statistical long shot.
And momentarily, the gamble pays off. He actually secures a spot in the training program at E.F. Hutton.
Which is huge.
It is. But recognizing that he cannot split his focus, Gardner makes the terrifying decision to quit his medical sales job entirely.
He burns his boats.
He commits fully to the E.F. Hutton program.
So he shows up at the E.F. Hutton office on his first day, ready to change his family's destiny, only to be told that the specific manager who had hired him was fired the week before.
The program is canceled.
The job doesn't exist.
This is where the structural integrity of Gardner's life completely collapses. He has voluntarily severed his only source of income for a phantom job.
Unbelievable.
And the resulting financial panic acts as a wrecking ball on his domestic life.
The relationship with Jackie fractures completely. They get into a massive argument. The police are actually called to their apartment.
Yeah. And when the police inevitably run Chris's identification, the system flags him.
For the parking tickets.
Exactly. It flags the $1,200 in unpaid parking tickets he accumulated while trying to secure the interviews in the financial district.
In the eyes of the law, he is a delinquent.
And because he has absolutely zero capital to pay the fines, the judge sentences him to 10 days in the county jail.
Let's isolate the psychology of those 10 days. You are sitting in a concrete cell. You have lost your income. Your partner has left, taking your infant son with her to the East Coast.
Everything is gone.
Every gamble you took has failed catastrophically. And the bitter irony is that you have an interview scheduled for the Dean Witter Reynolds training program, your absolute last remaining lifeline, and you are physically locked in a cage.
It is the absolute 0 point. When his 10-day sentence concludes, he walks out of the jail and goes back to his apartment.
And he finds it stripped bare.
Jackie has taken the furniture, the clothes, everything. He is standing in an empty room.
He has no money, no network, and no professional attire.
Right. He is wearing the exact clothes he had on when he was arrested. A casual jacket, sneakers, and clothes literally splattered with paint from a weekend project.
And the Dean Witter interview is that morning.
The cognitive dissonance of this moment is incredible.
Walking into a high-end Wall Street brokerage firm smelling like a county jail.
In an environment obsessed with pedigree, presentation, and wealth-wearing paint-splattered sneakers requires a level of ego suppression that most humans just do not possess.
Most people would self-sabotage, right? They would call in sick, preserving their pride rather than facing the humiliation.
But Gardner understands that pride is a luxury he cannot afford. He walks into that boardroom. He sits across from these polished executives.
And how does he win them over? He doesn't invent some tragic excuse.
No, he tells them the absolute, unvarnished truth about being in jail for parking tickets.
He uses raw charisma, radical transparency, and just an undeniable hunger.
And against all conceivable logic, he secures one of only 20 spots in the Dean Witter Reynolds trainee program.
It is a monumental victory of persuasion.
However, the structural reality of the program presents a new, seemingly insurmountable hurdle.
Because it is effectively an unpaid training program.
Right. The stipend provided was so microscopic that it couldn't cover basic living expenses, let alone rent in the San Francisco Bay Area.
And 4 months into this grueling program, the crucible truly begins. Because Jackie returns to San Francisco.
She does.
She meets Chris, hands over little Chris Jr., and leaves.
And Chris, operating on the foundational promise of his spiritual genetics, accepts sole custody of his toddler without hesitation.
But his economic reality instantly, violently clashes with his new reality as a single father.
Yeah, because the cheap boarding house he was living in had a strict, non-negotiable policy. No children allowed.
So they are evicted. Out on the street.
This initiates the year of working homelessness.
And we need to dissect the logistics of this period, because it defies belief. This isn't just couch surfing.
No, this is a highly complex, agonizing double life.
By day, Chris Gardner is a corporate trainee at Dean Witter. He is wearing a suit. He had precisely 2 suits that he had to alternate and wash in public sinks.
And his singular objective at work is to make 200 cold calls a day to high net worth individuals, convincing them to trust him with their capital.
Let's break down the mechanics of 200 cold calls a day.
In a standard 8-hour workday, that is roughly 1 call every 2.4 minutes.
That leaves absolutely no margin for breaks, for lengthy research, or for recovering from the constant psychological barrage of rejection.
None. To achieve this volume, Gardner engineered physical hack. He never put the telephone receiver back on the cradle.
Really?
Yeah, because putting it down and picking it back up took 2 seconds. Across 200 calls, those seconds compounded.
Wow.
So he kept his finger on the switch, disconnecting and immediately dialing the next number. He optimized his physical movements to maximize his output.
Because he had to outwork trainees who had MBAs, extensive financial networks, and trust funds to fall back on.
Exactly.
And he had to do all of this while maintaining an aura of absolute financial confidence.
Right. If any of his wealthy prospects or his Dean Witter managers suspected he was homeless, they would immediately doubt his judgment and fire him.
He was a master of compartmentalization.
But when the trading bell rang at 4:00 p.m., the compartmentalization ended.
His colleagues would head to upscale bars or comfortable homes.
And Gardner would sprint out of the office to pick up his son from a makeshift daycare he had scrambled to secure, and the daily geography of survival would begin.
The logistics of hiding a child and all their possessions while homeless are staggering.
Where do you put the stroller during the day? Where do you get clean diapers?
They slept wherever the environment offered a fraction of safety.
Yeah, occasionally he would sneak back into the Dean Witter offices late at night and sleep under his own desk, praying the janitorial staff wouldn't report him.
They slept in cheap flop houses if he managed to sell a leftover medical scanner for cash. They slept in city parks. They slept at the airport, blending in with delayed travelers.
And most famously, they slept in the locked public bathroom of the MacArthur BART transit station in Oakland.
Put yourself in that room for a second. Imagine the mental fortitude required for this. You are sitting on cold tile.
You have your arms wrapped securely around your child to act as a physical shield and a heat source.
You are listening to the heavy footsteps of transit security guards echoing outside the metal door, terrified that at any moment they will force you out into the dangerous night.
And simultaneously, while enduring this, you are mentally rehearsing your financial pitch for a CEO you need to cold call at 8 a.m. the next morning.
How does the human mind not shatter under that pressure? How do you hold those two extreme realities, Wall Street trainee and bathroom floor refugee, without going insane?
You survive it by anchoring to a singular, non-negotiable purpose. Gardner's anchor was the vow he made as a child in Milwaukee. When I have children, they will know who their father is.
He was systematically refusing to become Thomas Turner.
He was not going to abandon his son. Regardless of the physical toll or the daily humiliations, the purpose was larger than the pain.
And in the midst of this darkness, there was a critical lifeline.
Yes.
Gardner swallowed whatever pride he had left and sought help from Reverend Cecil Williams at the Glide Memorial United Methodist Church in the Tenderloin District.
Now, Reverend Williams operated a shelter primarily designated for homeless women, but he made an exception.
Williams later recalled that in the massive lines of desperate people seeking shelter every evening, Chris Gardner was the only man standing there, holding the hand of a baby.
Glide Memorial provided just enough sporadic safety, just enough caloric intake for Gardner to keep his mind sharp enough to execute his daily work.
So how does he execute the escape? He is making the 200 calls, but he needs a framework to keep from being overwhelmed by the sheer scale of his problem.
This is where he develops his operational mindset. The baby steps principle combined with purpose-driven persistence.
Let's talk about the baby steps principle.
When your objective is as colossal as escape extreme homelessness and conquer Wall Street, focusing on the macro goal will induce paralysis.
Right, it is too far away.
The baby steps principle is about hyper-focusing on the micro actions. Gardner didn't wake up worrying about buying a house. He woke up worrying about executing the next cold call.
He worried about studying for the next hour.
He reduced his horizon of focus to the immediate task.
And the purpose-driven persistence reframed the rejection. When a millionaire hung up on him, it wasn't a failure. It was simply the necessary statistical friction required to get to a yes.
And every yes was a brick in the foundation of a house for his son.
This relentless, hyper-focused execution culminated in 1982 when he had to take the Series 7 exam.
Which is brutal. The Series 7 is the General Securities Representative Qualification Examination.
It is a notoriously grueling 6-hour test covering complex financial regulations, investment risks, and securities math.
It has a high failure rate, even among candidates with finance degrees studying in comfortable libraries.
And Gardner studied for it in the dim lighting of a homeless shelter.
And he passed it on his first attempt.
Combine that undeniable academic feat with his massive call volume and his sheer endurance, and the management at Dean Witter Reynolds makes their decision.
Out of his entire class of privileged trainees, Chris Gardner is the only one offered a full-time salaried position as a stockbroker.
He successfully breached the mainframe.
With a guaranteed salary, the immediate existential threat was neutralized.
He saves his first few paychecks and rents a small, modest house in North Oakland.
The story of their first night there is profoundly moving.
It really is. He walks his son into the house. Little Chris Jr., whose entire cognitive development has been shaped by transient shelters, BART stations, and constant movement, looks around the empty room.
He looks at his dad and says, "Dad, we need to take our things."
He assumes they have to leave, because they always have to leave.
And Gardner looks at his son and replies, "No, boy, we have a key now. We are home."
We have a key now. He literally and metaphorically unlocked a new reality. The cycle was officially broken.
But the fascinating thing about Chris Gardner is that he didn't view this as the finish line.
No, he didn't just settle into a comfortable middle-class life.
He took the survival skills he honed on the streets and applied them directly to the trading floor.
Once the cognitive load of mere survival was lifted, his latent financial acumen just exploded.
He was aggressive, he was resilient to market shocks because he had survived real-world shocks, and he knew how to build relationships out of thin air.
He was quickly recruited away by Bear Stearns. He moved from San Francisco to the global epicenter of finance, New York City.
Within a few short years of sleeping in that public restroom, Chris Gardner was a top earner. By 1985, he was a millionaire.
The velocity of that wealth accumulation is staggering. But he wants equity, not just a salary.
So in 1987, he executes the ultimate entrepreneurial leap. He relocates to Chicago and founds his own institutional brokerage firm, Gardner Rich & Co.
And it is crucial to examine the mechanics of this startup, because it was not heavily venture-backed.
No, he capitalized the firm with a mere $10,000 of his own money.
He operated it out of his small apartment in Presidential Towers.
He didn't have mahogany conference tables. He had a single wooden desk.
During the hours of the market open, it was his trading desk where he executed complex financial maneuvers.
In the evening, he wiped it down, and it served as the dinner table for him and his son.
It's the quintessential garage startup, but applied to high finance. And he scales it aggressively.
He isn't just a retail day trader. Gardner Rich & Co. becomes a specialized execution firm. They handle massive, complex transactions for public pension plans, major institutions, and labor unions.
He builds a financial empire.
And to achieve this, Gardner didn't rely on blind luck. He codified his operational strategy into a framework he called the C5 complex.
He realized that the mechanics of surviving homelessness and the mechanics of building a brokerage firm required the exact same structured thinking.
Every plan, whether it's making it through the night or executing a multi-million-dollar trade, must satisfy 5 specific criteria.
Let's dissect the C5 complex, because this is the actionable blueprint you can apply to your own goals. The first C is that your plan must be clear.
Clarity is the antidote to chaos. If your objective is vague, like I want to be rich or I want a better life, you cannot build a strategic roadmap.
Gardner's goal wasn't vague, it was, I will pass the Series 7 exam and become a fully licensed broker at Dean Witter to rent an apartment.
A clear target allows you to measure your daily progress objectively.
Exactly. If the target is blurry, the execution will be sloppy. The second C is concise.
Conciseness is about operational efficiency. When you are operating in a highly volatile environment like a chaotic stock market or the streets of Oakland complex, multi-layered plans fall apart.
Your strategy must be distilled down to its most essential executable components.
If you cannot explain your plan simply, it is too fragile to survive contact with reality.
The third C is compelling. And I think this is where most people fail. They set goals that are logical, but not compelling.
Logic will not sustain you through intense suffering. The compelling nature of your goal is your emotional fuel source.
Your why has to be so devastatingly important that it overrides your biological desire to quit when things get agonizing.
Gardner's compelling force was the physical safety of his son. If your goal isn't compelling, the first major hurdle will shatter your discipline.
Which feeds directly into the fourth C.
Insistent. Consistency is the actual mechanism of compounding progress. It is the unglamorous reality of the 200 cold calls executed every single day, regardless of your mood, regardless of the weather, regardless of how many times you were rejected.
You do not build a multi-million-dollar firm through erratic bursts of
You
inspiration.
build it through relentless, monotonous, daily execution.
And the final C, the one that requires the most courage, committed.
In Gardner's framework, commitment means the absolute total eradication of the Plan B mentality.
Psychologically, if you have a safety net, you will subconsciously reduce your effort toward Plan A because you know survival is guaranteed regardless.
Gardner intentionally burned his boats. When he quit his medical sales job, there was no backup plan.
Total commitment forces innovation because failure is not an option. It is an existential threat.
Clear, concise, compelling, consistent, committed. The C5 complex is a masterclass in relentless execution.
And applying it diligently led Gardner to an outcome that goes far beyond a high net worth. In 2006, he sold his minority stake in Gardner Rich in a multi-million-dollar deal, achieving absolute financial independence.
With his financial legacy secured, he pivoted to codifying his life's philosophy. He wrote his memoir, which he famously titled The Pursuit of Happiness.
And we must explain the intentional misspelling of the word happiness with a Y.
Yeah, it originated from a poorly spelled mural he saw outside the makeshift daycare center his son attended during their year on the streets.
But Gardner adopted that Y as a profound symbol of radical personal responsibility.
The Y stands for you. You are responsible for your own happiness. The government won't do it. Your parents couldn't do it.
The cavalry ain't coming. The pursuit is entirely up to you.
The book, of course, becomes a massive #1 New York Times bestseller. It is adapted into the blockbuster film starring Will Smith, catapulting Gardner's methodology onto the global stage.
But this is where I gain the most respect for the man. He didn't cash his check, buy a yacht, and retreat from society.
No, he recognized the systemic issues he had escaped and dedicated his capital to actually dismantling them.
He transitioned into aggressive social entrepreneurship.
He understood the concept of paying the operational debt he owed to the people who kept him alive.
He became a massive financial benefactor for the Glide Memorial United Methodist Church, the exact same church and the exact same Reverend Cecil Williams, who opened their doors to him and his son when they had nowhere else to go.
He didn't stop there. He funded a $50 million initiative in San Francisco aimed specifically at creating low-income housing and employment opportunities in the exact neighborhoods where he used to walk the streets.
He heavily backed the CARE program in Chicago, an organization dedicated to providing job training and permanent placement for the homeless.
And he wasn't just an absentee donor. He physically showed up, donating professional clothing and providing direct career counseling to people in the exact position he once occupied.
He was engineering the infrastructure to help others achieve what he calls the universal dream.
Gardner's core thesis is that your spirit and your drive are infinitely more critical than your current geography.
It does not matter if you are sitting in an executive boardroom or on the floor of a BART transit bathroom. Your intrinsic human potential remains completely intact, provided you protect it and cultivate it.
He uses a specific phrase to describe taking power over your circumstances. He calls it atomic time.
And the mantra is, I drove here so I can drive out of here.
It is the ultimate metaphor for extreme ownership. You have to acknowledge your own agency in your current circumstances.
Even if external forces were unfair, saying, I drove here, gives you possession of the vehicle.
If you accept that your choices, however constrained they were, played a part in your current location, you inherently possess the power to make new choices.
You cannot alter a reality that you refuse to own. You must take the wheel.
But I want to introduce a moment of friction here because we have to look at the reality of trauma. It is an incredible story. The multi-million-dollar exit is fantastic. He even bought a Ferrari from Michael Jordan, which is the ultimate closing of the circle from that day in the hospital parking lot.
But does a massive bank account actually heal the trauma of being homeless with a baby? Does all that money erase the neurological scar of being kicked out of a bathtub at gunpoint by a monster?
It is a vital distinction to make, and Gardner himself is very clear on this point. Money does not heal trauma.
Money is an inanimate tool.
It provides options, it provides security, but it does not perform psychological repair.
The true success of Christopher Gardner's life, the ultimate defining victory, was not the creation of Gardner Richenko.
It was the fact that his son, Christopher Jr., and later his daughter, Jacintha, never had to spend a single day wondering where their father was.
He broke the cycle.
Exactly. He successfully re-engineered his spiritual genetics. The trauma is healed by the cessation of the abuse.
The healing is in the presence, the stability, and the love he provided to his children that was denied to him.
The wealth was simply a byproduct of his fanatical commitment to that primary goal.
He kept the promise he made to himself as a terrified little boy in Milwaukee. He became the man he needed when he was young.
And that is why his framework is so universally applicable. It transcends the mechanics of Wall Street.
It is a fundamental examination of human agency, the power of a compelling purpose, and the extraordinary lengths a person will go to when they refuse to let their path. At the very beginning of this deep dive, I asked you to imagine waking up with absolutely nothing. Chris Gardner's life is empirical, documented proof that your current circumstances, no matter how dire, do not dictate your ultimate potential.
The cavalry isn't coming. But you have everything you need within your own spiritual genetics to build the life you want.
You can rewrite the code. You have the keys. You can drive yourself out.
I will leave you with a final, practical challenge to analyze in your own life. We all have an objective that intimidates us. Something that seems mathematically impossible based on our current bank account, our education, or our network. What is the red Ferrari in your life right now? What is that intimidating, impossible-looking dream that you are simply too afraid to walk up to and ask, how do you do it?
If you enjoyed this video, make sure to like it. For more deep and unique stories like this, subscribe to the channel. We truly appreciate your time. We'll meet again with another powerful story. Until then, keep rising from zero.